Let's start with the things we think we can manage. The small mistakes, the minor miscalculations, and slowly work our way toward the absolute, unmitigated horrors. We like to think of the earth as a garden, something we've paved, fenced, and ultimately tamed. But that is a lie we tell ourselves just so we can sleep at night. Nature isn't a character in our story. It's the setting, and it is entirely indifferent to whether we live or die. Every time we've tried to battle the environment, we've found out that we aren't the protagonists. We're just organic matter. I want you to think about that. Really think about it. We spend our lives building walls and air conditioning our rooms, convinced that we've won. But history is just a long list of times the walls fell down. Stick with me. Because by the time we reach number 1, you'll realize that when the world decides it's done with us, there is no negotiation. There is only the silence that follows. This is the list of the deadliest times humanity tried to fight nature and lost. Number 8. The vertical graveyard. There is a point on this planet where the human body begins to digest itself just to keep the heart beating. We call it the death zone. Imagine you're trekking through a blizzard, you're exhausted, barely able to breathe, and you see a man sitting in a cave. He's wearing neon green boots. You might think he's resting, but he's been sitting there since 1996. For over 20 years, Green Boots wasn't a person anymore. He was a literal trail marker. That is how this story ends, with people stepping over the frozen corpses of their friends just to reach a summit that doesn't care they are there. But before we talk about the bodies, let's talk about how they got there. In the mid-90 seconds, Everest became a product. You didn't need to be a legendary climber anymore. You just needed $65,000. On the 10th of May, 1996, dozens of people were lined up near the summit. It looked like a grocery store queue, except the air was thin enough to kill you, and the temperature was 40 below. Then, the storm hit. It didn't look like a monster at first. It just looked like a cloud. But within minutes, the visibility vanished. Rob Hall, one of the most experienced guides in history, ended up trapped near the top. He spent his final hours on a satellite phone, patched through to his pregnant wife in New Zealand, telling her he loved her while his body slowly turned into ice. You see, the mountain didn't attack them. It just didn't get out of their way. We thought that if we paid enough money, nature would respect our itinerary. It didn't. Reflecting on it now, nature doesn't charge a climbing fee. It just collects its due in bone and ice. Number 7. The Ghost in the Thorns. Imagine a multi-million-dollar imperial project, the pride of the British Empire, brought to a complete, terrifying standstill by two cats without manes. In 1898, the British were building a railway bridge over the Tsavo River in Kenya. They had the best engineers, the best guns, and the backing of the most powerful nation on earth. And then, the workers started disappearing. One by one, night after night. By the end, the British Army had to be called in to hunt, well, a couple of animals. But let's back up. You're a laborer. You're thousands of miles from home, sleeping in a thorn boma, a fence of thick, spiked branches meant to keep the wild out. You hear it first. A soft huff outside the tent. Then the sound of canvas ripping. And then, the person sleeping right next to you is simply gone. No scream, usually. Just the sound of something heavy being dragged into the tall grass. The Tsavo lions were different. They didn't hunt because they were starving. They learned to ignore the fire. They learned to ignore the guns. They began to hunt for sport. They would leap over the thorn fences, snatch a man, and eat him within earshot of the other workers. It got so bad that the laborers staged a mutiny and fled. They realized that the British Empire couldn't protect them from something that moved like a ghost in the dark. We brought steam engines and Lee-Enfield rifles to the savannah. We thought we were bringing civilization. The lions reminded us that, in the dark, we were still just a food source. We built a bridge to the future. The lions reminded us we were still on the menu. Number 6. The White Labyrinth. Imagine the most advanced technology of your era, encased in iron, stocked with 3 years of the finest food, and then realizing that the ocean is turning into stone around you. Years after the Franklin expedition vanished in 1845, search parties found something haunting. They found human skeletal remains with distinct cut marks on the bones. These weren't from wolves or bears. They were made by the serrated knives of the survivors. This is how the pride of the British Navy ended. Hungry, poisoned, and eating their own officers. But it didn't start with madness. It started with silver spoons. Sir John Franklin set out to find the Northwest Passage with 2 ships, the Erebus and the Terror. They had a library of 1,200 books. They had a player piano. They had thousands of tins of modern food. They were the peak of Victorian arrogance. But then, the ice closed in. The ships were stuck. For 2 years. And here's the twist. The very thing meant to save them was killing them. The tins of food were sealed with lead solder. As the men waited for the ice to melt, the lead was leaching into their blood, rotting their brains, and making them paranoid. When they finally abandoned the ships, they didn't just carry food. They tried to walk 1,000 miles across a frozen desert, pulling heavy sledges filled with silver spoons, silk handkerchiefs, and Victorian writing desks. They died holding onto their status symbols. The Arctic doesn't care about your social standing or your fine china. It only cares about heat. And they had none left. The ships were named Terror and Erebuses. Sometimes destiny has a very dark sense of humor. Number 5. The Night of the Long Teeth. This is the sound of 1,000 men dying in a swamp, but not from bullets or bayonets. In 1945, during the final months of World War II, nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers were retreating from British forces on Ramree Island. They were pinned against the coast. Their only choice was to cross 16 miles of thick, saltwater mangrove swamp. Only about 20 of them ever came out the other side. But before we get to the end, think about the choice. You're a soldier. You're wounded, tired, and the British artillery is closing in. You see the swamp. It looks like cover. It looks like safety. You step into the knee-deep mud, and the smell of rot hits you immediately. The mosquitoes are so thick, you can barely see. Then, the sun goes down. In the dark, the splashing started. It wasn't the sound of a boat. It was the sound of 20-foot saltwater crocodiles. The Japanese soldiers had accidentally walked into one of the most densely populated crocodile habitats on the planet. The mud made it impossible to run. The salt water ruined their rifles. All night long, the survivors had to listen to the death rolls and the sound of their comrades being dragged under the black water. You see, man-made war is loud and ideological. Nature's war is quiet, efficient, and purely about calories. The crocodiles didn't care about the Great East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. They just saw 1,000 slow-moving meals. The crocodiles didn't take sides. They just took the opportunity. Number 4. The Black Sunday. We ripped the skin off the earth, and the earth decided to suffocate us with it. In 1935, across the American Great Plains, children were dying of something called dust pneumonia. Their lungs were literally being filled with topsoil while they sat in their own living rooms. People were going blind. Static electricity was so strong that it would knock grown men unconscious if they tried to shake hands. But this wasn't an act of God. It was a suicide attempt. For decades, we were told the American dream was to turn the plains into a wheat factory. We tore up the deep-rooted prairie grass that had held the soil together for 10,000 years. We thought we knew better than the ecosystem. Then the drought came, and without the grass, the soil wasn't soil anymore. It was just powder. On April 14th, a day known as Black Sunday, a wall of soot 1,000 feet high and hundreds of miles wide came screaming across the land at 60 miles per hour. People thought it was the end of days. Birds fell dead from the sky because they couldn't breathe. You could stand in your kitchen with every window shut and still watch the dust pile up on your table like falling snow. We broke the cycle, and the cycle broke us. If you treat the land like a factory, eventually the factory collapses on the workers. Nature doesn't have an HR department to complain to. It just stops providing the oxygen. Number 3. The Great Drowning. Statistics are cold, aren't they? But try to wrap your head around this. 4 million people. In 1931, the Yangtze River in China didn't just flood, it reclaimed the land. An area the size of England was completely submerged. Millions drowned. But for the survivors, the nightmare was just starting. They were trapped on tiny strips of high ground, surrounded by a sea of bloated livestock and human remains. To survive, people began eating bark, then weeds, then things I won't mention here. But why was it so bad? It was a perfect storm. Years of drought had baked the earth hard as a brick. Then came a winter of massive snowfall, followed by a spring of heavy rain and 7 different cyclones in a single month. The riverbanks, which humans had built and reinforced for centuries, simply vanished. Imagine waking up and the floor is wet. An hour later, you're on the roof. By sunset, there is no roof. There is only the sound of rushing, brown water and the screams of your neighbors. We build dams. We build levees. We tell the water where to go. Until the water reminds us that it weighs a ton per cubic meter and it doesn't listen to engineers. Water is patient. It will always find the path we tried to block. Looking back, maybe we should have stopped trying to tell the river what to do. Number 2. The election of the dead. 30,000 people died in less than 2 minutes. The only survivor in the entire city was a man in a subterranean prison cell. In 1902, Street Pierre was the Paris of the West Indies. It was beautiful, vibrant, and sitting right at the foot of a volcano called Mount Pelée. Today, it's a graveyard, not buried in ash like Pompeii, but incinerated. A pyroclastic flow, a 1,000-degree cloud of gas and rock moving at 400 miles per hour, hit the city and turned every living thing into carbon instantly. But here's the part that should make you angry. The mountain was screaming for weeks. Ash was falling. The sulfur was so thick it was killing people's pet birds. The local snakes were fleeing the hills and swarming the city streets, killing dozens of people. But there was an election coming up. The governor didn't want the voters to leave. He wanted them to stay and cast their ballots. He used the local newspaper to tell everyone the mountain was safe. He even sent troops to the city gates to stop people from fleeing. He told them that science was on his side. On May 8th at 7:52 a.m., the mountain unzipped. Ludger Silbaris, a man who had been thrown in a dungeon for a drunken brawl, survived because his cell was thick stone, with only a tiny vent. He spent 4 days in total darkness, listening to the absolute silence of 30,000 dead neighbors. The governor wanted to win an election. The volcano didn't even know there was a vote. Nature doesn't care about your political career. It only cares about pressure. Number 1. The year without a summer. This is the most extreme battle on the list because it was global, it was invisible, and we didn't even know we were fighting it until we were already starving. In 1816, the world broke. In New England, there was a foot of snow in June. In Italy, the snow fell brown and red. In Europe, the harvests failed completely. People were eating horses, then dogs, then moss. Riots broke out in every major city. People thought God had finally turned his back on humanity. But the enemy wasn't a ghost. It was a mountain on the other side of the world that most people had never heard of. A year earlier, in 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia exploded. It was the loudest sound in recorded history, heard over 1,000 miles away. It put so much ash and sulfur into the stratosphere that it dimmed the sun for an entire year. It changed the chemistry of the sky. Imagine being a farmer in Vermont. You've done everything right. You've tilled the soil, you've planted the seeds, but the sun stays pale and sickly. The frost kills your crops in July. You have no idea why. There is no internet, no global news. You just know that the world has gone cold and your children are hungry. This is the ultimate nature battle. A mountain in Indonesia coughs and a civilization on the other side of the planet collapses. It reminds us that our entire modern world is just a thin layer of paint on a very volatile, very indifferent rock. We like to think we're the masters of our fate, but we're really just passengers on a ship that we don't know how to steer. Looking back at these, it's hard not to feel small. Not spiritually small, but physically, terrifyingly insignificant. We talk about saving the planet, but let's be honest, the planet will be fine. It's been through fire, ice, and giant lizards. It's us that should be worried. We fight these battles with technology, with politics, with ego. But nature doesn't fight. It just exists. And occasionally, we get in the way. Which of these stories made you feel the most uneasy? Was it the lions in the dark? Or the sun disappearing in 1816? Let me know in the comments. Maybe we'll look at the victories next time though. In this game, a victory usually just means living to see another sunrise. History doesn't whisper, it leaves scars. Would you like me to create a similar script for another topic? Perhaps focusing on the most mysterious vanished expeditions or the most terrifying natural phenomena?